You're sure it was this evening?
What?
That we were to wait?
He said Saturday. I think.
You think?
I must have made a note of it.
But what Saturday? And is it Saturday? Is it not rather Sunday? Or Monday? Or Friday?
40 years ago, I was a young lad starved for some excitement in the arts. Godot came to Dublin and blew the roof off.
The Irish playwright Tom McIntyre, speaking of the impact that the play, Waiting for Godot, had on theatre audiences in Dublin. 50 years after the play, by an obscure Irish writer, Samuel Beckett, was first written and performed in French and in Paris, it's become one of the 20th century's most obscure, influential and unexpected masterpieces of theatre, perhaps through the wry humour of the famously elusive and haunted man who wrote it. On January the 5th, 1953, at the small Theatre of Babylon in Paris, Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, in its first production by the French director Roger Blin, opened to mixed reviews, ranging from bored and irritated to ecstatic and bemused. In one review, the French playwright Jean Anouilh used a line from the play to describe a revolutionary masterpiece that would make other playwrights despair. Nothing happens. Nobody comes, nobody goes. It's awful. What was so revolutionary about the play? With two tramps, Vladimir and Estragon, waiting on a road, by a tree, that it could send a shiver through you, if you didn't just stand and walk out like many and sometimes most of its first night audiences.
Tremendous shiver went through the Dublin theatre, and it badly needed it. We hadn't seen anything like this. The strange power of it, the newness of it. There's a debate theatre going on in Beckett that was entirely new. It's intellectually rigorous and demanding, and there's an Irish participle, argufying. There's a great deal of argufying going on.
You sure it was here?
What?
That we were to wait?
He said by the tree. Do you see any others?
What is it?
I don't know. A willow.
Where are the leaves?
It must be dead.
No more weeping?
Or perhaps it's not the season.
Looks to me more like a bush.
A shrub.
A bush.
What are you insinuating? That we've come to the wrong place?
He should be here.
He didn't say for sure he'd come.
And if he doesn't come?
The burning question. Will Godot come? How long will they wait? What's going to happen? I caught up with the respected Irish Times theatre critic, Fintan O'Toole, at a busy hotel in Dublin and asked him what he thought Beckett was asking his audiences and characters to wait for.
What you get in Beckett's plays, and increasingly, in fact, as he gets older, is the sense that these people are desperately attempting to keep going. I think what he's interested in is the fact that you keep doing something that you don't understand, that you keep going on a journey where you don't know anything about where it might be leading, that you keep doing things which perhaps seem pretty meaningless.
Nothing happens, apparently, except it keeps on happening.
Writer and actor Shane Connaughton, reflecting that nothing does happen in the play. Twice.
I always think of Twelfth Night, the character of Fabian. They're watching Malvolio and his performance when they're gulling him, and they can't believe his actions. And Fabian says, if this were played upon a stage now, I could condemn it as an improbable fiction. And Beckett is dealing with the improbable fiction, which is life, trying to make sense of it. He's concerned with the oneness of things, which is a great Irish theme, Celtic theme as well, the music of now. And that's to do with time and how we navigate time. And those two characters in Waiting for Godot, they're trying to make sense of it.
One of the extraordinary things about Waiting for Godot is, first of all, in terms of its kind of multiplicity of styles. It is both music hall and vaudeville.
Jocelyn Clark, commissioning manager of the Abbey Theatre.
There is something I would argue, very, very moving about the kind of music hall games that both Vladimir and Estragon play on stage and that role playing. Several years ago, I can't remember when, I think in the late 80s, perhaps even the early 90s, there was a production of Waiting for Godot with Steve Martin and Robin Williams. And everybody got extremely sniffy that these film comedians would actually perform the great text of Beckett. But I would suspect that Samuel Beckett would actually approve.
The lonely predicament of Samuel Beckett's characters still echoes through the theatre. You hear it in Tom Stoppard's play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, in Harold Pinter's The Dumb Waiter.
In a lee ar yatta an tróna, in a sea fhui scáil na gro. A géisteacht sa marv ciúnas, le coscéim ar lacht. Coscéim gan macala, Godot ag teacht.
Poet and playwright Vincent Woods is among many writers in listening to the enigmatic footsteps of Beckett for echoes of their own experience, of silence, loneliness, the feeling of having somehow, somewhere, lost their footing.
Leaning on the gate of evening, lying in the gallows shade, listening in the dead silence to a footstep on stone, a footstep without echo, Godot. Home. I wrote that when I was about 15, I think. I don't know, I was fascinated at the time by the notion of Godot. It seemed somehow to go very deep into the notion of a kind of human loneliness. And I had grown up in the country on a small farm where there was quite a lot of time to be lonely. And I was thinking about it in the recent past, about how we had beggars who'd come regularly, a few times a year. The same people would come, knock on the door, stay a night or two in a shed on the farm, and go off again. And you never knew more than their first name. Thinking about the play and where it comes from as well. Those people on the roads come back to me, on the roads of my childhood come back to me.
There is a kind of humour which comes out of not even just Irish, but I think it's this Protestant Irish sensibility of that era, that it's the humour of a class of people whose real power is declining. The heroic age of the class to which Beckett belonged was in the past. And there's a kind of implicit joke in a lot of even the physical surroundings of Dublin in Beckett's time, where you have literally a place which had been one of the great cities of Europe in the late 18th century, which was falling apart, quite literally falling apart, where you have, for example, grand houses built for very wealthy people being occupied by teeming swarms of very, very poor people. The fact that most Beckett plays are populated by people who are homeless, in sometimes a literal sense and certainly in a metaphorical sense, I think does connect very strongly with the Irish experience. And it probably does allow, I think, particularly Irish actors to play Beckett more realistically than you sometimes see it elsewhere. Irish actors in general don't take Beckett characters as if they are these strange signifiers taken off the page. They take them as real people.
When I'm playing in Waiting for Godot, I don't differentiate between the funny bits and the serious bits, if you know what I mean.
The Irish actor Barry McGovern worked with Beckett in the 1980s and is performing in a revival of Waiting for Godot at the Gate Theatre in Dublin.
Vladimir and Estragon are certainly tied together because they're tie-ed, as Estragon says at one stage, but they talk about being tied. I suppose they are like an old couple who've been together forever. They've been there forever, They're like, Laurel and Hardy or whatever. They just have been there forever together, and this is the condition that they're in. So it's that kind of a relationship, I think, more than anything else.
It always works well with Irish actors doing it. I think English actors doing it are not very successful at it because it's like Irish actors trying to do Noel Coward, which is a sad experience. But the tone of those two characters is very Irish, not Pozzo, funnily enough. Pozzo comes across like an English character. Maybe that's because he's playing the slave driver. But and also Lucky has got lots of Irishisms as well. Lucky, of course, that is a wonderful thing too. The very fact that he's called Lucky. He must be the most unlucky character ever written, and yet he's called Lucky. It's like if he is the example of the slaves of the world, and yet he's a wise man.
A wise man, perhaps. But called on to think aloud, I'm not quite sure I understand what he's saying.
Given the existence as uttered forth in the public works of Punker and Votman of a personal god, quay, 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 with white beard, quay, 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 outside time, without extension, who from the heights of divine apathia, divine athambia, divine aphasia loves us dearly, with some exceptions for reasons unknown, but time will tell, and suffers like the divine Miranda with those who, for reasons unknown, but time will tell, are plunged in torment, plunged in fire.
His thinking aloud is wonderful because he tries to explain the meaning of life, which is an impossibility. No wonder he's mad with the pain of this existence.
Ah, that's what it means.
I think the title Waiting for Godot was the first thing I encountered, and I was suspicious of the title because I was that rebellious kind of Catholic upbringing thing in Ireland.
Visual artist Dorothy Cross remembers how much coming across Beckett's work meant to her.
For me, it felt very much like some expectancy of some of religion, and I was struggling with religion as a teenager. And funnily enough, then kind of Beckett in a funny way, when I left the country to study elsewhere, after dropping Catholicism, he filled the gap in a way because I thought he was so wonderful that he remained living and confronted death with such fantastic humour. So he became an alternative religion in a funny way. Well, it's a kind of survival and an amusement in the predicament. And that's what I loved about his attention to detail, the mundane, you know, the fart or the testicle getting caught in the bicycle wheel. And yet the persistence and the fact that he did continue, it kind of tied into the existentialists, that you all read when you're a teenager, the question of suicide, and you're glad in the end that they decide not to kill themselves. It's that kind of thing. So it's that perilous thing between death and life.
Why don't we hang ourselves?
With what?
You haven't got a bit of rope?
No.
Well, we can't.
Let's go.
Wait. There's my belt.
It's too short.
You gotta hang on to my legs.
And who'd hang on to mine?
That's true.
Suicide and existentialism, the terrible wheel of being. The after you etiquette of hanging. It could drive you to drink. But shouldn't that be a porno? Isn't this, after all, a French play? The anguish and black comedy of a theatre emerging from wartime occupation, from shock and denial. Isn't it that peculiarly French experiment, theatre of the absurd? I climbed the tallest tower in Paris, the Tour Montparnasse, to meet the editor of Lire magazine, Pierre Assuyer.
One of the best French writers is Samuel Beckett in French. He is a French writer just because he wrote it in French. In France, we have a habit to say the real nation and the real citizenship of a writer, it's his language. The sound, his own sound, his particular sound in French is humor. It's a kind of humor you will never find in French theatre. There is a part of his humor who is typically English or British, doesn't matter, and which is not French at all, is the understatement. And you will find a lot of understatement in Godot. Anyway, for me, it's impossible now for years and years, to look at a tree, a simple tree, in the landscape or in the street, without thinking to the tree of Godot.
I agree with Beckett when he said in the 30s English has been abstracted to death, and to get some life out of it nowadays is quite a task. And he partly resolved that by often writing in French and then translating into English. But he was aware of the problem, and well, he might. If, as an Irish writer, you've gotten hold of the Irish language, as Gaeilge, that's to say, our English is so full of treasure from the Irish we've all but abandoned, that if you have the Irish we've all but abandoned, even partly on your fingertips, it's a huge help in what we call busting the syntax, in freshening the English that, in a sense, we're stuck with. Take a sentence such as, we give birth astride of a grave. My heart leaps at the richness of the Saxonisms, right? Beckett went to the bother of teaching himself to avoid or certainly mitigate the Latinity that is so strong in contemporary English, right? I think he does a great job most of the time, but that's because he's on his toes.
Many people seem to have a snatch or two of Beckett, an aphorism, a phrase, a thought, tucked away in their minds, something pithy, to the point. He seems to have the knack of plucking the moral out of demoralised. No matter, try again, fail again, fail better.
I was struck, I remember, by the lines, we give birth astride a grave, and then that's Pozzo says that, and then that's echoed by Vladimir a page or two later saying, down in the hole, lingeringly, the grave digger puts on the forceps. And I remember in my naivety comparing those lines to some of Hamlet's lines. I mean, the profundity is magnificent.
Astride of a grave and a difficult birth. Down in the hole, lingeringly, the grave digger puts on the forceps. We have time to grow old. The air is full of our cries. But habit is a great deadener.
He did come from a troubled origin in that whenever he returned to Ireland, it didn't suit him and he kind of ran away again. And apparently he used to lie in his bedroom in Foxrock in Dublin and get this condition where boils grew in his anus, and he'd close the curtains and lie there for weeks on end. So as an adolescent myself, I think I identified with that and found it heroic, because in the end of the day he'd produced such fantastic work that kind of buoyed me and my own little scrabblings in art.
Keeping your head above water, just, so often the predicament of Beckett's characters seems to involve keeping your sense of humour, and Beckett, if you're open to it, is funny. Fintan O'Toole.
The essence, I think, of what Beckett's trying to play with in the theatre, and he is a playful writer, I mean, is the fact that there's a kind of self-imprisonment going on. A lot of the plays, particularly the longer ones, have this continual question is, why don't you stupid people just get up and leave? Nothing is happening here. Why are you imposing on yourself this duty to keep sitting here looking for some kind of meaning, even though I'm telling you all the time that the meaning isn't going to arise? And he's hugely attracted to that paradox.
In the meantime, nothing happens.
You find it tedious?
Somewhat.
And you, sir?
I've been better entertained.
So, if we're all going to go on waiting for Godot, let's ask the obvious. Who is he?
Godot?
You took me for Godot?
Oh, no, sir, not for an instant, sir.
Who is he?
Oh, he's a kind of acquaintance.
Nothing of the kind. We hardly know him.
True, we don't know him very well.
It was a bit like The Wizard of Oz and not seeing. Godot being one of the great absent presences in theatre. I suppose a bit like the ghost in Hamlet. He must be the most significant absent present. Otherwise, seeing the play and reading it over and over, somehow I think Godot becomes everyone.
You have a message from Mr. Godot?
Yes, sir.
He won't come this evening.
No, sir.
But he'll come tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Without fail.
Yes, sir.
There is, at the edge of Beckett, a whiff of the transcendental. It's as if the Irish thing got to him. because if there's anything that distinguishes the Irish music, it's that it's haunted. It concedes two worlds, and it's alive with the traffic between the two worlds. Now, looking at Godot, when that child comes on in the second act, when that tree, when I see that tree, when I see that child, I shiver. Maybe for the only time in the proceedings nowadays, because I get the whiff of the haunted at the edge of the proceedings. I get the whiff of the mythic. I know these references. I know that child. That child, I met that child in my dreams. That child is there to direct my life.
Sometimes it seems to me that it almost has the quality of a dream in its artificiality and its reality, in the same way that dreams can be interpreted in so many different ways. Godot can, but for me, it goes to very simply, in a way, to the heart of what it is to be human, and those times when you pause almost outside time.
I think it's endured the test of time and has been voted in a number of polls as the most significant or the greatest play of the 20th century because it is a play about all of us. All of us can identify with it. There's the famous example of the inmates in San Quentin prison seeing it and knowing exactly who Godot was because they'd been waiting for him quite a long time. And I think that particular aspect of the play strikes home with everybody in the audience, and I think people just identify with it so much.
Samuel Beckett, the writer, died in 1989. He described the very success of Waiting for Godot as an endless misunderstanding. But, nevertheless, he encouraged and participated in performances of the play across the world, and, among other places, in prisons, to captive audiences. Godot, for one set of prisoners, became society, the outside. For another group of prisoners, in Sweden, they took the opportunity, while performing the play, to make their escape.
Samuel Beckett and Peter O'Toole were wandering through Paris one night and they were both a bit drunk. And they sat down in the doorway and a policeman came along to move them on, and Samuel Beckett said, "Oh, don't worry, officer, don't worry, we're only resting our bones." And that has stuck. Every time I see Beckett's photograph, I think of that remark because it's so true to the man. He's got a powerful persona without saying a thing. And look at his face. It's like that W.H. Auden kind of lined face. He's more severe than Auden. And a very intimidating and humbling presence. And I think he was a very humble man too.
We'll hang ourselves tomorrow. Unless Godot comes.
And if he comes?
We'll be saved.
Well, shall we go?
Pull on your trousers.
What?
Pull on your trousers.
You want me to pull off my trousers?
Pull on your trousers.
Yes.
Well, shall we go?